Hello and welcome to New Wave History. I'm with Dr. Ayesha Jalal, who needs no introduction, Pakistan's finest and foremost historian. And we are very lucky that she's giving us this time, her precious time, while she's on vacation. And we're going to talk about her books. And I'll start, Dr. Jalal, with your seminal work, I would put it that, on Pakistan's creation and the role of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and how you looked at fresh evidence, you did a very insightful analysis, and that sort of remains the most important book of our times. And I think the reason I want to start with that is also because there's a bit of a revisionism going on in the past few years. I mean, it's always been there, as we discussed earlier, about, the foundational issues of Pakistan, how Jinnah messed it, how perhaps he should not have thought of creating Pakistan or not relented to or accepted a moth-eaten, truncated Pakistan. But I think I want to start with the question, how serious was Jinnah about Pakistan?
Well, I mean, the point is that, this whole so-called revisionism that you talk about is a product of one very fundamental flaw, which is that this country lacks a historical consciousness. They don't understand how history works. There's still this overwhelming emphasis on individuals. Individuals of the past, individuals of your middle years, and individuals today. It's all about the individual and not about the context. So as I've always said that, too much is made about the history that Jinnah made and too little is made of the history that made Jinnah.
Right.
So, you cannot, there's a where is my interpretation different? Here you want to either talk about the individual or the Hindu-Muslim issue that led inevitably to Pakistan. What is ignored in all of this is the reality of provincial politics. So, nobody understands provincial politics. Those youngsters that I run into who are ignorant of history and who want to blame Jinnah because they are unhappy with Pakistan, first of all, are ignorant of what's going on in India. So the point is that they are unable to understand that Mr. Jinnah was handed a deck of cards. He basically a hand of cards, which was not very good, but he still played a competent game. And there was the other side as well. So it was a question of negotiating an arrangement, a power sharing arrangement, which the Congress was not willing to do. And Mr. Jinnah had some, weaknesses in the Muslim organizational structures for reasons that I've explained.
Yes.
But the most important thing is that we want to talk about partition or the creation of Pakistan through the religious angle or through the personal angle.
Yes.
And we ignore the fact that there was a larger provincial dynamic that even dictated the terms to Mr. Jinnah. So इसमें बिल्कुल ignorance है.
Right.
So, you want easy, quick solutions. It's about religion. It was about Hindu Muslims not being able to live together, or it was Mr. Jinnah's, personal, his ambition. And yes, there were differences between him and Gandhi, personalized, but it's not the whole story.
Right.
So I think that's what I would say. So, when you understand the provincial dynamics, which is a long story, and Punjab in particular, where there was a three-way divide.
Yes.
So I think that I myself, in the sole Spokesman, critiqued Jinnah's Punjab and Bengal strategy because he was an all-India politician, and consequently he did not account for the provincial imperatives that were needed to save them from getting divided. Right? So it was an indicative of his all-India priorities that led ultimately to the Congress's success in partitioning at the behest of the Hindu Mahasabha of Punjab and Bengal, which undermined his Pakistan.
Right. So,
going back to Pakistan, was he serious or not? He was very serious about the Muslim share, about getting the Muslim share in the power sharing arrangement that he was trying to negotiate.
Right.
But the problem, the conceptual problem, which I don't understand why people can't get their head across, is that what emerged in 1947 was a truncated and moth-eaten version of what Jinnah wanted. He's on record. Magar wo aap dekhte nahi, wo kehte he's been after this all his life.
Yeah, exactly.
And Mr. Stanley Walpott says that this was his greatest accomplishment when the Congress called for the partition of Punjab and Bengal. It's completely wrong-headed.
Yes.
So it's the neglect of provincial dynamics in this larger story that is at the heart of the problem. And also the fact that this all related to the federal issue, which is one that Pakistanis don't want to recognize, that their problems are because of the absence of a genuine federation.
Right, exactly. And I think
that's related to the way you analyze the Pakistan demand or Mr. Jinnah's role in that. Yeah. So I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it's all there, but nobody wants to grasp it. It's easier to say it was Hindu-Muslim differences or Mr. Jinnah was so. This is what it is. The youth want to blame Jinnah, but they don't seem to have any comprehension of what is really going on. So I think it's just indicative of a misunderstanding of history.
But there's also thank you, and we'll come to the federal question as well, because that has continued to haunt.
But it's related to how you interpret partition.
Yeah, it's central. It's central. Punjab and Bengal, particularly.
That's right.
But Dr. Jalal, also there's a big narrative, argued by so many people that Mr. Jinnah was an agent of the British imperial power.
Let me explain this to you. I'm very familiar.
And you've scanned so many documents and all that.
Very familiar with this. And the point is that there's nothing to prevent a Tory in the Foreign Office or in the Commonwealth Office having a view on the matter, and some conscientious researcher, come journalist, jumping on that and saying this proves that Jinnah was an agent. Now, Mr. Jinnah kept his lines open with the British establishment, as did other politicians, as they still do. That in itself doesn't make you an agent.
Yeah, correct.
Secondly, I think that the opinion of one individual or even two does not make for British policy. Nobody has been able to provide persuasive information suggesting that the decision to create a Pakistan as a way to undermine India was a British policy. If that had been the opinion of some stray people, it means nothing. That's something that, again, it's a national problem, that when we talk about America did this or America did that, America doesn't care about you. But you take an individual's comments, as happened recently, to stand in for American policy. You need to distinguish between those things.
Yeah.
This is like saying that your wonderfully coordinated governments are on the same page. They're not. If you take an individual's statement and say this is government policy, that frequently doesn't it's not that it doesn't work out that way. So I think that's what's happened with. There is a desire on the part of those who are pro-Congress or unhappy with Pakistan to sort of say that Jinnah was doing this for either personal aggrandizement, his personal ambition, or he was the agent of the British. But there is absolutely no evidence. Even if you begin to look at Churchill. Now, the thing is that Churchill was basically an imperialist, arch-imperialist. He had no desire to make any concessions to the Congress. But to say that he imagined the whole thing and created it is just too much. I think that this kind of history is in the conspiratorial mode, which comes naturally and is embraced by people who don't understand history, who don't want to understand history, because history is nuanced, it's more complicated.
Yeah.
But whereas these conspiracy theories make sense to people because they suit your present disaffection. So you can decide what it is. So conspiracy theory really works in that sense.
But one of the arguments that the conspiracy theorists make is that right after partition, and Pakistan's role in Cold War and Pakistan's.
I wrote a book called the State of Martial Rule: The Origins of Pakistan's Political Economy of Defense, in which again the discussion about I've had so many discussions with Pakistani scholars and non-scholars, about Mr. Jinnah's draconian treatment of the NWFP after 47. The point is that he was still operating within the constitutional framework. Which can't be said about those who followed him. So this business about critiquing Jinnah, because it sort of seems to, make sense to you, is to again ignore the structural realities of Pakistan. The sad truth is that people think that Pakistan was simply presented to Mr. Jinnah on a golden tray, and then it came into being. There's been a real struggle for this country to survive, and it continues. And those who want to now say that it was a mistake in the first place basically want to give up the struggle.
Okay. So anyway, going back to this whole Spokesman, one of the key arguments that you make is that, the demand for Pakistan was also a bargaining counter. If
all politics is negotiation.
Correct.
I might inform your wonderful readers that the very word parliament means to parley. And the fact that nobody is parleying these days, at least certainly the opposition and the government is not parleying, is indicative of the complete failure of parliament as a concept. The nation has not adopted that concept.
Right.
You may have some sort of affinity towards a shura, but the point is that a parliament is meant to speak and talk and so politics is the art of the possible.
Yes.
So when you say that Pakistan was a bargaining counter, Mr. Jinnah, these days there are politicians who say, yes, we will talk if you accept these demands. So there's nothing to talk about if you accept their demands. So it's clearly something is very seriously amiss. Politics, you need to understand what politics are. It is about negotiations,
Correct.
It's about give and take. It's about compromising. So the point is that to say that it was a bargaining counter, Mr. Jinnah could only do so much given the context. He was not a Superman.
Right. And so,
I think people want him to be a kind of a Superman because they're looking for a new Messiah.
Yeah.
And they're unhappy, so that's what it is. But I think that if they simply use their rational faculties and understand history, they would come to different conclusions.
Right.
This is an emotional, ill-informed response.
Okay, thank you. But about obviously the role of the International Congress in the 40s, and of course, just before Pakistan was also instrumental in a way that Mr. Jinnah finally and the Muslims, leaders, the elites thought that, So at what point did the International Congress actually said, okay, let's go for partition, or let's, we're not going to exceed.
I think it was already moving in that direction, but I think that the cabinet mission plan, which again, I don't know whether your listeners are informed about that, it was very heavily influenced by Zafarullah Khan.
That's right.
So it was catering to Jinnah. Once it became clear that the Congress may not even get a clear a clear majority, they became, they wanted a strong center to curb the princely states or to bring them into the union. So Mr. Jinnah was expendable, as Nehru famously said that the Muslim problem is only a quarter of the problem. Right. We have to bring in the princely states. So the Congress was not prepared to cut in Mr. Jinnah in order to lose the rest, getting the princely states. And as you know, that in giving up Pakistan, where they lost territory, maybe up to a quarter or less, they were able to pull in 40% of India.
That's right.
With a strong center.
Yeah.
So the sacrifice that they made, and to be very honest, my evidence suggests that they didn't expect Pakistan to survive. And it was meant to collapse in 6 months. And I think there are people still waiting for that to happen. But I think, and doing their best, and Pakistanis are doing their best to make it happen. But the fact of the matter is that is the calculation. So they didn't want to cut in Jinnah. And power politics is about, as I said, compromise and negotiation. So they decided to diddle him out of any share and let him have a truncated Pakistan that he had rejected on 2 separate occasions.
Correct.
At the time of the Raja Gopalachari offer, and then at the time of the cabinet mission.
Right.
So why did he then accept it? He was made to accept it because he was not going to get anything else.
That's true. That's true. But Dr. Jalal, also, I do want you to comment on the role and importance of the communal question, because obviously that was shaping and informing politics at a certain level, and today a lot of people say that the heightened communalism in the subcontinent, especially in India, is linked directly to the partition. That the Hindu nationalists. I mean, I'm just saying these are not serious opinions, but these are more political or popular narratives. Is that partition na hoti to ye na hota. Because the Muslim...
I mean, the Muslim question would have been totally eliminated. I mean, as is happening today in India, where Muslims have no representation. I mean, in the UP, in the 2019 election, even 14, I mean, there was practically nobody. So I think that the lack of today the Muslim political representation in India is less than their population.
That's right.
So if this is the dream of Pakistanis, they should just move to India. I don't see what the problem is. I mean, I'm sure that they can find ways of, there's shadi.com, there are many other things to sort of just become Indian.
Yeah, but there's not a single minister in the current Indian cabinet.
Oh, exactly. But those who are not historically minded will say it's because of partition, but it's because you don't understand why partition occurred in the first place. You insist that it occurred because Mr. Jinnah wanted it. And had Mr. Jinnah not been there would have been no partition. I think that's where I'm trying to suggest you're completely wrong.
Yeah. But I mean, I do. Also coming back to, these are such important questions, and you write in your several books as well, this whole ideological battle as well that we saw as Pakistan was being created in the first decade, secularist versus Islamist, or whatever the shape of state would take place. So it is very important to understand, and I think I want you to elaborate on this, that, the leaders who were at the forefront of the Pakistan movement were modern Muslims, had a different idea of Muslimness in the subcontinent than what was later appropriated, let's say, by the right wing or the clerics, or even later by the Pakistani state itself. I think just emphasize on that particular aspect.
Look, the battle was always there, and it was not a battle so much of so-called secularism versus religion. That's a false dichotomy. Most Pakistanis interpret secularism to mean ladiniyat,
yes,
which is totally incorrect. The word for anti-religion is atheism, and
correct,
not secularism.
Yes.
And if you understand the development of secularism, in Europe, you'll understand that, but I won't go there. So the question is that it was a power struggle. The right wing had, including the Jamaat-e-Islami and many others. Later on, Shabir Usmani did sort of move to the League, at least support the League. But the League's main support was really of those who were quote unquote modern. So why did this issue become so fraught? I think that it's an ongoing struggle, which we give names, either about a lack of religiosity or secularity. So I do think that is still the fundamental problem, only that the state that you inherited, or rather the institutions that you inherited are now really, they've come apart at the seams.
Mm-hmm.
And these are sort of colonial institutions, and they haven't been meeting the needs of an aspirational population for years, for decades. Now the situation is that it's really hit rock bottom, and the chances are that there may be still more deterioration ahead before Pakistanis realize that instead of fighting with each other, they may be more usefully engaged by trying to decide what kind of a riyasat they want, what kind of a state they want. Because this state is based on colonial institutions which were there to cater for colonial purposes.
Correct.
They don't serve your purposes at all.
Yeah.
So I think that crisis needs addressing. And because it's not getting addressed, we are blaming Pakistan, we are blaming just about everything.
Yeah,
I think that if
exactly.
Muslims were to really do an assessment of the relative advantages they've had from Pakistan, then they'll realize.
Definitely.
The point is that there was a larger strategy, it didn't work out, but this is the best you got.
Right.
But if you're saying that it was better not to get Pakistan in 47 and to stay with India, then I think that's really a kind of fantasy which is belied by current events in India.
Yes,
So I think there's
that's
a huge historical problem there.
But I mean, going back to Mr. Jinnah, I mean, his own politics, it also underwent so many transformations.
Again, because a politician responds to context. Just as there are politicians today in your country who don't think twice about contradicting themselves within a minute of speaking, Mr. Jinnah had a right to sort of respond to different contexts.
Yeah. I mean, from a staunch Indian nationalist,
He remained, one of the first things he said to Wazir Hassan when he was invited to join the League was that his membership in the Muslim League should never be seen as, or should not be a cause for distracting from the nationalist cause, which was to get rid of the Brits.
Right.
So I do think that needs to be understood. I mean, he may not be an anti-colonial nationalist of the Gandhian variety, of the activist kind, but to be fair, I mean, in the 1920s, Mr. Jinnah was moving towards even activism in Bombay. He was emerging as a popular leader until Gandhi returned and stole his show. So I do think that his differences with Gandhi stem from that. And Gandhi used to also sort of, irritate him by saying, please speak in Gujarati. We knew that Jinnah didn't have a very fluent Gujarati.
Right.
So there are these personal things. But to sort of say that this is, the whole subcontinent was split on account of one man is a kind of history or an attitude which speaks volumes about how well you understand history.
And I totally agree with you, but I think the issue is that in India, this narrative has been popularized to
So why are Pakistanis more interested in Indian narratives than their own? I mean, you have your own narratives.
True.
But yes, in India, this narrative is there, but most sensible Indians
also realize that it's not.
it.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's now becoming even more apparent to them when they are sort of assessing the Nehruvian era, or they're being made to reassess that era.
So I would very much like you to also tell us a bit about the what was happening in the Indian polity, in the 40s and later, because you see what we are seeing in India obviously is a continuation of certain trends. It's not just come up, suddenly.
I think the most remarkable thing about India is that, there was a concept of anti-colonial nationalism, which aimed at creating a truly organic federalism. But as the Congress leadership, especially the machine politicians like Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel came closer to the British leaving India, the desire to seize power sort of overtook everything else. So as a result, there was a split. If you look at the early Constituent Assembly debates in India, you find a split between those who remained wedded to the idea of a federal India.
Right.
Men like Sarat Chandra Bose, K.T. Shah, many others, and then like Ambedkar, I mean the great hero of many sort of people in India, who was wanted a centralized kind of system which was more British than the British.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to get at is that that's what was going on, and so this process had unfortunately started earlier. So those who argue, I mean, the problem is that partition cannot be the cause and reason. Cause and consequence of. I mean, those who say that a partition, if it hadn't happened, then there would have been no problem. But then there are those who also argue that partition occurred because of these differences.
Because of these problems, yeah.
So the question is that you can't have it both ways. I mean, there was a problem. They needed accommodation. And yes, the British presence meant the Jinnah was given a hearing, which may not have been the case had there been no British. And the British were quitting India, so that allowed Jinnah to make his case pretty effectively. But the Congress was not prepared to undermine its opportunity to sort of, take over power over the whole of India and pull in the princely states. So they made a decision. They actually they preferred to perpetuate the colonial system with its racial structure, racial structures, which have been used against Muslims, against Dalit, by the upper caste. So that's what it is. It's just so convenient. But so I would say that partition was caused by this tension between going for a more organic federalism and one that enabled a transition that was smoother and enabled the Congress machine politicians from getting ensconced at the All India level and doing their own bidding.
Right.
I think that's what it is.